Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim, Daf Yud Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Diana Bloom in loving memory of her Zaidi, Israel Marmarek, on the occasion of his yahrzeit. Today's daf is sponsored by Avi and Shelley Yonitzman in honor of their daughters Bat Mitzvah, Shira and Hallel. Mazal tov. Okay, today's daf, we are in the middle of a topic. We started with Chomer b'Nedarim mi'B'Shvuot, and we said, what is the case where Chomer b'Nedarim mi'B'Shvuot? That Konam sukkah shani oseh, I take a vow that I won't make a sukkah, or I won't sit in a sukkah, or something like that, or I won't take a lulav, or right that about the lulav, the neder, the vow is on the lulav that I won't take it, or the tefillin that I will not put on. That actually is a valid vow. Whereas if I did it as an oath, it would not be a valid oath. If I say, I swear I will not sit in a sukkah, that's not an oath. There's a study guide for today, which will also help go over the structure. Okay, next. The Gemara had said that in the name of, right, Rav Kahana had said, or Rav Yomi had said, who said this, whether it's Rav Gidl in the name of Rav Gidl in the name of Shmuel. How do we know that you can't take an oath? Now, I want to categorize these things. La'avor ala mitzvot, which is our Mishna. In other words, what's the source for the halakha in our Mishna? Before we move on and get to the source, I want to talk about there's different types of vows one could take. One could take a vow to do devaro hareshut, which is, I could say, I want to take a vow to eat, right? Eating is optional. I mean, obviously we all need to eat, but whether I want to eat a particular food, that's my own decision. It has nothing to do with the mitzvah. You could take a vow that on a mitzvah, okay? Like for example, to vow to keep a mitzvah. I swear that I will, let's say if we keep food, okay, one of the examples the Rambam brings is, there's a mitzvah derived from the Torah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. It's a special mitzvah to eat on the 9th of Tishrei. So if I say, I'm going to vow that I'm going to eat on the 9th of Tishrei, since it's already, I'm commanded to do that, so ein shvuah halal shvuah. Okay, you're not going to have a shvuah halal shvuah in that case, because we learned a few dapim ago, mushba ve'omed mehar Sinai. Right, I'm already commanded from her Sinai, and therefore it's not a valid shvuah. So that's already right. We learned ein shvuah halal shvuah. This is going to come up later in today's daf in the next Mishna. I can't take one oath if I'm sworn to do that, whatever that is. So there's again reshut. There's l'kayem mitzvah. Okay, to keep a mitzvah. There's no such thing. And now we're talking about to not keep a mitzvah. Now, even not keep a mitzvah breaks down into two. There's not to keep a mitzvah, meaning not to do a positive mitzvah. And there's not to keep a mitzvah, which is to transgress. Okay, like for example, eating on Yom Kippur. Okay, so I vow to take an oath to eat on Yom Kippur. That actually is transgressing what it says in the Torah. That's a little bit different than levatel a mitzvah, which is or an oath actually, but whatever, whether it's a vow or an oath, it doesn't matter. But these are the four categories, right? There's reshut and mitzvah, it breaks out into two, but mitzvah breaks down really into different categories, which is to keep a mitzvah, which is just, I'm already mushba v'omed. There's to go against a mitzvah, and that breaks into two, which is either to not keep a positive mitzvah or to transgress a negative commandment. So the one that we're talking about right now is levatel mitzvah, not to keep a positive mitzvah. So how do I know, right, in the mitzvah category, none of these shvuot apply. So how do I know? Yesterday we learned it from lo yachel devaro, which is when you take a shvuah, whatever I do, right, I can't desecrate my word. So that means basically it only applies to my words and not to God's words. Okay, so I'm only commanded not to desecrate my words when it comes to a shvuah if it was my words reshut rather than things that had to do with God, mitzvah. To which the Gemara said, why distinguish neder then? That also comes from the same language, to which they said, oh, well, neder is different because neder is on the chefetz, on the object, and therefore the vow can actually apply because there's no forbidden, the lulav doesn't have to be, right? There's no commandment on the lulav. So if my vow is about the lulav itself, that lulav that I can't take, but it's about the lulav, therefore the vow actually takes place, it happens, it's affected. Whereas a shvuah is on me, and I can't say I'm going to go against a commandment in the Torah. To which the Gemara says, starting from 4 lines from the bottom of Tetzayin Amud Bet. What do you mean? It's learned out from there. Really, it's learned out from a different verse. And this, by the way, will resolve the question about the difference between Neder and Shvuah, because this pasuk is only about oaths. Okay, there's a section in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 5, which talks about Shvuat Bitoy. This is where the halachot are learned about. If I express an oath in words, I have to keep it. It's also mentioned in Varim, in the pasuk that we saw already, but it's also mentioned in Vayikra. The context there is sacrifices. This is a case where the pasuk says, I'll read it, it's Vayikra chapter 5, verse 4. O nefesh ki tishava levatei b'sfatayim l'hara u'leitiv, a person who takes an oath with their lips, right, expresses in words, l'hara o lehetiv, to do bad or to do good. What it really means, bad and good, is understood as negative. I will not, a negative formulation. I will not eat, for example. Lehetiv is something good. I will eat. Anything a person expresses, bishvuah, with an oath, and then let's say I forgot that I took an oath. I said I'm going to eat a particular food today, and then I forgot, the day came and went, and I forgot to eat that piece of food. Okay, so basically then I remember later that I made the mistake. I have to bring a korban shvuah, a sacrifice, because I went against my word. So now the Gemara says, going back, they say, what do you mean that you learn this halacha from devaro? We learn it from a different pasuk, from the pasuk I just quoted you, Tanya, as a Braita says on that pasuk. And that's a Braita darshaning that pasuk. You might have thought, it's a bit of a complicated language, what they mean is you might have thought, if you took an oath to not keep a mitzvah like sukkah, okay, let's just fill in. You might have taken an oath that I won't sit in the sukkah, v'lo bitel. Now, what does it mean, lo bitel? You didn't not do the mitzvah, which basically means you sat in the sukkah. So basically, my oath was, I'm not going to sit in the sukkah, and then I sat in the sukkah. You might think I have to bring a korban shvuah, a sacrifice, because I went against my oath. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk tells you, which we're going to learn, just like we already learned already, but from a different verse, that this is not an oath at all. So I don't have to bring a korban because it's not considered an oath. Why is it not considered an oath? Because it's on a mitzvah, right? That's exactly our thing. You cannot take an oath to not keep a mitzvah. How do we learn it? Lahara o lehetiv. Because the verse says to do something bad for you or good for you, or good or bad, however we translate it, right? Originally, we kind of translated it as good or bad as a positive or a negative, right? Formulation. I will do something or I won't do something. So now, since these are juxtaposed in the verse, and as if they're the same, now obviously they're not the same, they're opposites, right? But there has to be something similar about them, is what they're going to say. It's what we call a hekesh. When two things are in the verse together, we assume what's true for one is true for the other. Ma hatava reshut, just like lehetiv, if I say I will keep something, an oath, it's going to be a valid oath, has to be reshut and not a mitzvah, af hara'a reshut. Likewise, to not do something like lo eshev basukah, okay, wouldn't apply because it has to be reshut, not a mitzvah. Now, there's something very unclear here, even though it sounds very simple. Why are they assuming the hatava is reshut and not? Why couldn't it include something positive, a positive formulation? Now, what would it be? Positive formulation to keep a mitzvah is obviously not, because we already know mushba v'omei mehar Sinai. And therefore, since we were already sworn in at Mount Sinai, and ein shvuah halal shvuah, you can't have an oath on an oath. So a positive formulation to keep a mitzvah would obviously not be. But even what about a positive formulation to go against a mitzvah? Like, I will eat on Yom Kippur. Okay, positive formulation to not keep a mitzvah. Why wouldn't that work? So now we're going to have, for this, you have to really look in the Sugya and Shvuot on Daf Kaf Zayin, okay, which we're not going to open inside. And it's actually a little bit complicated because they suggest something, then they reject it, they say something else. But one of the suggestions they bring here, which I liked, was that hatava reshut. Why is hatava reshut? Because hatava, even though we understood hatava as a positive formulation as opposed to a negative formulation, I will eat, as opposed to I won't eat, hatava also includes the word good. It's good for me. Now, if I take a positive formulation that goes against the Torah, Okay, like I will eat on Yom Kippur. That can't be good for me because not keeping Yom Kippur is bad for me on a spiritual plane. So that's one of the answers, one of the explanations they give, because the Gemara there explicitly, they bring this drasha, and then the Gemara says, why are you assuming the hatava is reshut? Like, it's not so obvious. Okay, so I just want to point out here that they say it as if, oh, it's obvious, hatava is reshut. The Gemara says there, from where did you get this? And then they try to go into, they have two different explanations. Anyway, one of them, you'll hopefully remember, we get to Shavuot Kaf Zayin, and we'll see the whole sugya there. But one of them is this idea that it can't possibly be good for you if it's against a mitzvah. So therefore, it can't be that lehetiv includes to go against the mitzvah. And since that doesn't include to go against the mitzvah, and it must be a reshut, something optional, right? Anything that's not a mitzvah is considered in the category optional. Therefore, again, you can't say, I will not. You can't use a negative formulation to go against the Torah, because you can't say, I will not sit in a sukkah. Okay, and that's where they get it from. So therefore, yatsa nishba levatel et mitzvah v'lo bitel she'ena reshut biyado. Yatsa means excluded from this. This is basically the continuation of the sentence. We were saying it's the explanation. We take out someone who's nishba levatel et mitzvah v'lo bitel. That's our case. Again, it's a confusing formulation. What it means is, right, we remove someone who took an oath to not keep a mitzvah and actually kept the mitzvah. They're not going to bring a sacrifice because this isn't something in there. They're not capable, right? They're not allowed to do this because it's against the Torah, it's against the mitzvah, and therefore they're excluded. So now we're left with our question. Okay, so it was a little complicated to understand all those parts, like what is hatavat reshut? That was the really hard part, I thought. But in general, we basically, as in a simple way, what we have was, number one, source devaro that comes to say you can't make an oath, I will not sit in a sukkah, and it's not a valid oath. And there again, what does it mean you can't take an oath? It means you can do whatever you want, but it's a meaningless statement, which means that you won't have to bring a sacrifice if you did it anyway, right? If you went against your oath. Then we had the second pasuk, lahara uleitiv, which compared those two and came to the conclusion that since lahara must be not against a mitzvah and only to do something that's on your right, where you took an oath to do something optional. Therefore, lahara must be also something optional. So therefore, taking an oath not to sit in the sukkah is not an oath at all. Why do we need two psukim for this? Well, one is to tell you which one, the one we just saw, which is in the context of the sacrifices. Right? We have one pasuk, which is just in Sefer Devarim, which says, don't lo yachel devaro, don't desecrate your word. You made a promise, you have to keep it. This pasuk is, if you went against your promise, your oath, then you have to bring a korban. So one pasuk, lahara uleitiv, is coming to tell you, you don't have to bring a korban shvua in this case. But it still might be forbidden, right? There's sometimes where you might do something that's wrong, but you don't necessarily get the punishment for it. So the second verse, le'achel devaro, is telling you there's actually nothing wrong with it. You haven't transgressed a negative commandment of the Torah by doing this, meaning, right, it's not only that you're not obligated to sacrifice, but there's not even a negative transgression here. You didn't do anything wrong at all because your neder was totally invalid. Okay, whereas if you only had one pasuk, you might have thought, I'm sorry, your shvua is totally invalid, my mistake. You might have thought that this only means you don't have to bring a sacrifice, but you shouldn't do this because you're taking an oath against the Torah. And if you don't keep your oath, you're going against your oath. But no, in fact, there's actually nothing wrong with it because your oath was totally 100% invalid. New Mishna. And from here, it's going to be a pretty much straightforward, simple daf. Yesh neder b'toch neder, ve'en shvua b'toch shvua. Okay, another chumrah of neder to shvua. We were in the middle of chumrot. What are stringencies of neder to shvua? We have one in yesterday's, right? That was exactly our thing, that you can't take an oath against the Torah, but you can take a vow. So that would be a chumrah, because if I said, I vow not to sit in the sukkah, and then you sit in the sukkah, you actually go against your neder, your vow, and you're liable. Another one is, I can take a neder on a neder, meaning if I took a vow, and then I did the same vow twice, the exact same thing, or that's what we're going to see. Is it the exact same thing? And that's going to be part of the deliberation here. But let's just assume right now, the simple reading is, Yesh neder b'toch neder. I took a vow that I'm going to do something or not do something, and then I did it again. So if I transgress, I transgressed it twice. We'll see some of the ramifications. Like, for example, they're going to bring an example of a nazir. So if I said I vowed twice I'm going to be a nazir, then I actually have to do 2 naziruyot. Well, we'll get to that in 1 minute, what the ramifications. So if I take a vow and then the exact same vow twice, it means 2 vows. But ein shvua b'toch shvua, and this we already know from Mushba v'omei mehar Sinai. If I took an oath on the same thing twice, the second oath is not an oath. We'll see then, is it 100% not an oath? But let's just assume right now the oath doesn't apply. So now, this is the basis for the whole Mushba v'omei mehar Sinai in the shvua. If I take a shvua on something to do a mitzvah, which is different than the case we just discussed, which was to not keep a mitzvah. If I take an oath to keep a mitzvah, that oath is invalid, because I'm already commanded from Har Sinai and ein shvua chala al shvua, There's no such thing. This is the same thing as saying ein shvua chala al shvua, ein shvua b'toch shvua. Once I have an oath, another second oath will be meaningless. Ketzad. So what's the case? Amal hareini nazir imochal, hareini nazir imochal. If I took a vow that said, I made a condition and I said, if I eat, I'll be a nazir today if I eat. Let's say I don't want to eat today. So I say, if I eat today, I'm going to be a nazir. And then I say, hareini nazir imochal. And I say the exact same thing twice. Ve'achal. And then I ate. Theoretically, you could say you were just repeating yourself and you didn't really mean to add anything new. But the Mishna says, what does that mean? So here's the real ramification. In this case, I have to be a nazir, stam nizirut, average, if I didn't specify how long I'm going to be a nazir for, it's 30 days. So if I said hareini nazir mochal, hareini nazir mochal, I'll be a nazir if I eat, I'll be a nazir if I eat, and then I ate, I would have to do two sets of being a nazir, 30 days, bring my sacrifices. You could see this is fascinating because, if you're going to deliberate at all whether this works or not, you actually end up bringing sacrifices to the temple, like all sorts of Torah laws kick in that you have to keep, but it's a very serious issue if you bring a korban to the temple that you actually weren't obligated to bring. That's called bringing chulin la'azara. It's a problem. So here you see it's so significant. My neder is valid. I now bring 2 sets of sacrifices. I'm a nazir twice. All sorts of laws kick in. But shvua shelo ochal, if I say I swear I'm not going to eat, and then you forget that you took an oath, and you ate, you're only going to be liable 1 korban shvua. You don't take 2. You don't say, oh, you said something twice, you meant 2 shvuot, and then you're going to have to bring 2 sacrifices. No, just 1. So now I see you're asking about the nazir and eating. This is a formulation, and the truth is I don't have a good answer for this. Why the Mishnah formulated it, hareini nazir im ochal. It's a good question. It could have just said hareini nazir, and you're going to see in a minute that they're going to talk about hareini nazir ayom, hareini nazir ayom. I don't know why they predicated it upon a condition, but it's just giving you a circumstance where if you said, if I eat, I'll be a nazir, it could have also just said hareini nazir, which in and of itself is a neder. So I don't have a good answer for that, why the Mishnah formulated as if I eat, But obviously the eating has nothing to do with being a nazir, This is just, I happen a random formulation of how to accept nazirut. Oh, I'll be a nazir if this happens. There's all sorts of, there's a case where 2 people are betting on something and they say, if I'm right, you'll be a nazir. If you're right, I'll be a nazir. Anyway, there's a problem with that kind of nazirut. But that's, people took on often formulations. I'll be a nazir if this happens. That's an aside. Amal Rav Huna. I see there's a lot of questions on the chat. I can't follow them all, but anyway, catching here and there. Comes Rav Huna and he says, Amal Rav Huna, Lo shanu ela de amal, hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir lemachal. Rav Huna immediately understands the Mishnah not according to the simple reading. We understood the Mishnah as yesh neder al neder. If I say the exact same thing twice, which it said in the Mishnah, right? I say, I'm a nazir if I eat, I'm a nazir if I eat. Exact same thing. It will work. Comes Rav Huna and he says, only if you said, I'll be a nazir today if I eat, I'll be a nazir tomorrow if I eat. Or just, it sounds like you could even simply say, I'll be a nazir today, which is taking upon yourself nazirut. That's a form of vow because you're vowing to be a nazir. Or hareini nazir lemachal, I'll be a nazir tomorrow. Demigo de kamitosif yomi yetera chayla nazirut al nazirut. Only in this case, says Rav Huna, is it going to work because, this is when you have in math, and there's a set, and there's no overlap, right? Or there's two sets that 100% overlap. Here we have two sets that don't 100% overlap, right? We have days 1 to 30. I'm standing now on day 1 of the month. So days 1 to 30 will fall into my Hareini Nazir Hayom. If on day 1, I say not only Hareini Nazir Hayom, which means 30 days starting from that day, but you also say Hareini Nazir L'Machal, which means from the second day of the month till one day into the next month, right? One day is not going to overlap. He says, only in that case will your neder, your second vow, be valid, because you have to give that second neder somewhere, right, to grab onto, which is because it applies on day number 31, because basically you're saying I'll be a nazir from day 1 to 30, and I'll be a nazir from day 2 to day 31. So since there's migo is mitoch, from the fact that to kamitosif, you're adding Yomi Yatera, 1 extra day, the nizirut applies. Aval, but he says, Amal Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom. But if you say, I'm a Nazir today, and you repeat the exact same thing, and there's no extra anything in your second neder, ein chala nizirut al nizirut. In that case, even ein neder b'toch neder in that case, it doesn't work. We're going to have a lot of questions on him. You might already be thinking, it's not what the Mishna said. So the first 2 questions of the Gemara, we're going to have 4 questions. One will only come up in tomorrow's daf. We're going to end in the middle of question 3 today. End with the question, get to the answer in tomorrow's daf. And the first 2 questions are actually going to be from the language of our Mishna. Shmuel says a more simple reading of our Mishna. And Shmuel we're not going to even deal with because he's obvious that that there's no questions to be asked. Shmuel amar afilu amar hareini nazir hayom chala nizirut alei. He says, even if you say, I'm a nazir today, that is a valid neder. Okay, that works. So here comes the Gemara starting their questions, right? Shmuel is just the simple way we read the Mishnah, that even if I said the exact same formulation, the second formulation will apply as well. So comes the Gemara and starts question. Rav Huna, aditana, ein shvua b'toch shvua. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, yesh neder b'toch neder, right? You can vow 2 vows, one on the other, and they apply. And ein shvua b'toch shvua, but what won't work? An oath on an oath. Well, since it said the negative, what doesn't work? It doesn't work to have an oath on an oath. Litany, it should have said in the Mishnah, yesh neder b'toch neder ve'ein neder b'toch neder. It should have said, sometimes a neder works and sometimes it doesn't. And it should have said, hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir l'machal, yesh neder b'toch neder. It should have said, like Rav Huna said, in other words, it should have specified, if you say hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir l'machal, and there's not 100% overlap, but the second neder has somewhere to grab onto, then that will be a neder. Your vow will be a good vow, or a valid vow. Hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir hayom, ein neder b'toch neder. But if you said it the exact same formulation, it wouldn't work. So, Kashya be'emet, that's difficult because the Mishnah seems to really sound like, and that's why we understood the Mishnah like that in the beginning, like Shmuel did, which is neder always works and shvua never works. So if neder sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, the Mishnah should have said so. It doesn't really make much sense. Second question, so that there's no answer to. Second question, yesh neder b'toch neder ve'ein shvua b'toch shvua. There's a neder within a neder, but there's no shvua within a shvua. So now the Gemara says, hechidami, what's the case? So now they say, again, we're talking about our Mishnah, but now they're trying to say, let's fill in the blanks, okay? In other words, we need to come up with a case where there is neder b'toch neder and there is not a shvua b'toch shvua. So let's try to find parallels. So let's fill in the blank with Rav Huna. Ilema da'amal hareini nazir hayom hareini nazir l'machal, which is basically saying in that case, the neder will be a neder. The second one, that's the only case Rav Huna thinks it will work. Well, let's try to find a parallel by an oath. To kavatega be'shvua, what would be the parallel? Now, one might argue with this, but the parallel they say is shelo shvua shelo ochal shelo ochal te'imim v'chazar ba'ama shvua shelo ochal anavim. If you're going to say that hayom and machar are 2 different things, okay. Now, if I go back to my sets, there's sets of things that are not overlapping at all. There's sets of things that are 100% overlapping, right? You think of those circles, those diagrams with circles, and then there's circles that overlap, okay? Our case of neder that Rav Huna says is where the circles overlap, right? They somewhat overlap, but they somewhat don't overlap. It's a little strange that the Gemara is bringing an example of two circles that have nothing to do with each other, right? It's not exactly the same. The way they understand Hayom and Machar right now is that Hayom is different from Machar. They don't think about that Hayom includes, right? Thank you. It's called a Venn diagram. It's not that Hayom and Machar are two totally different things, right? That's the way the Gemara is right now understanding, as if today and tomorrow are two different things. Now, it's true today and tomorrow are two totally different days. But the meaning of taking upon Nazirut today and tomorrow actually overlaps. But right now, the Gemara is looking at Hayom and Machar, the way Rav Huna understands it, is two totally different things. So what's the parallel by Shvuah? I took an oath that I won't eat figs, and then I took an oath that I won't eat grapes. Now, if that's the case, are we going to say, and as if we want to say, there is a neder b'toch neder in Hayom and Machar, and there's no oath of Teinim and Anavim, that's totally not true. If I take an oath, I'm not going to eat figs, and then I say I'm taking an oath, I'm not going to eat grapes, since there's no overlap between those two sets, therefore, right, Amai lo chalash v'al shvuah, why wouldn't the second oath take place? Of course it would take place. So that can't be the case of the Mishnah. So right now they think the only way to understand the Mishnah is so what would be the case of an oath on an oath that wouldn't work? And now once we come up with the case of the oath that doesn't work, we're going to say that must be the case of the neder that does work, that's mentioned in the Mishnah, which would then go against Rav Huna. So okay, let's say I say, right, the only thing, if it's not going to be Teinim and Anavim, it must be Teinim and Teinim. So I say, I'm not going to eat figs. I'm not going to eat figs. That must be the case of a shvuah that doesn't work. Now, if we go and parallel that, let's find the parallel case in neder. What will that be? It would be the kavateka be nizirut hechidami. What would it be a case in nizirut? They keep using nazir as an example of a neder. Ta'amal hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir hayom. And what does it say? Katana ish neder b'toch neder and kasha l'Rav Huna. So again, sounds a little bit. It's very simple. They're basically saying we need to find a case where, again, they're not using my Venn diagram of this overlap, and that's going to be the answer. So don't worry. It's not like the Gemara is not going to get there. In the end, they're going to say, no, we need to find something that's more similar to this overlap. But right now, they're assuming today and tomorrow are two distinct things. And if we compare it to Shvuah, Teinim and Anavim are two totally different things, and that actually would work. So you can't say that that's the case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah would have to be Anavim and Anavim, or Teinim and Teinim, it doesn't matter. Figs and figs. By Shvuah, that won't work. By neder, it will work, and that would be hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir hayom, where they're exactly the same thing. So in order to respond to that, Rav Huna is going to answer the following. Rav Huna doesn't answer, but the Gemara is going to bring an answer for him. Amar lecha Rav Huna, matnitin de amar hareini nazir hayom, hareini nazir lemachal de kavateka be shvuah. Right, we're going to find a real parallel. The parallel you brought was not a good parallel. It's not like Anavim and Teinim, two totally different things. It's shvuah de amar lo shelo ochal teinim, b'chazar va'amar shvuah shelo ochal teinim va'anavim. I said first, I'm not going to eat figs. In the second case, I said I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. There's already an overlap there, okay, because the figs are in both. That's a much more similar example. Now, in this case, they're going to say de lo chayla. The teinim and anavim in a shvuah will not apply because you already did teinim, so you can't say teinim and anavim. Whereas when it comes to neder, something like that, which would be hayom and machar, would apply. And that's how Rav Huna answers, and that seems like a very simple, straightforward answer, which we would have expected they would have come up with that kind of example from the beginning. They didn't. They raised the question, and they said, well, this would be a good example. Okay? Because again, you said shvuah shelo ochal teinim, and then you said teinim and anavim. So there's an overlap of the teinim, but there's no overlap of the anavim. In that case, Rav Huna will say, if it was a vow, it would apply, because there is somewhere for the vow to take place, and that's the hayom and machal. But if it's an oath, it doesn't apply. Sounds good, but there's a problem with this. If you look at what Rabbah said, let's talk about Rabbah and an oath like this. According to our understanding now, it's very simple. I took an oath to say I won't eat figs, and then I took an oath to say I won't eat figs and grapes. The oath is not valid. Rabbah is going to say the oath is totally valid, and the oath is there. We're going to see, he talks about a unique case, but I want you to remember what we're looking for here. What we're looking for is Rabbah is going to say an oath like that is totally valid. Okay, and then we're going to be stuck with our answer for Rav Huna because it goes against what Rabbah says. So now they say, Hama Rabbah, shvuah shelo ochal teinim, Exactly our case. You said I swear I won't eat figs, and then you said I swear I won't eat figs and grapes. Now, in this case, one thing you have to understand here, when you take an oath to not eat figs and grapes, in order to go against that oath, you have to not eat figs and grapes. You have to eat figs and grapes. If you ate only figs or only grapes, you don't mean figs or grapes, you mean figs and grapes. You would have to eat both in order to be liable. So now he comes up with a unique case where you won't be liable, even though you ate figs and grapes, because we're going to call it chatzi shiur. Okay, if I eat only figs, for example, or let's take the grapes, because the grapes is the one where you have the grapes together with the figs. If I ate grapes, I'm not liable unless I also ate figs. And what we're going to call that is chatzi shiur. You only went against half the oath. And therefore, you wouldn't bring a korban, basically. So comes Rabbanit says the following complicated scenario. You said shvuah shelo chal te'enim, and then you said shvuah shelo chal te'enim v'anavim. Stage one, what did you do? Achal te'enim. You ate te'enim, so you went against your first oath. V'ifrish korban, and because you didn't remember that you had said the oath, and then you went against your oath, you'd have to bring a korban shvuah. V'chazar, after you designated the korban, chazar v'achal anavim. Then you ate grapes. Now, there's two options of how we could view this. You ate grapes. You also ate figs. So do we say you went against your shvuah of, I won't eat grapes and figs? Well, if you ate the figs and you didn't separate the korban yet for the first oath, and then you ate grapes, we could say you went against the second oath. But you ate both. But since you separated the korban, you basically were saying, I took care of the fact that I ate te'enim, and that splits between your two actions. So when you now eat the grapes, it's as if you're eating grapes by themselves, because the eating of figs is no longer connected because you already separated a korban for eating the figs. So now when you go and eat the grapes, we can't connect it with eating the figs, in which case you only ate grapes, in which case you didn't go against your second oath. Why? Not because there is no oath. That's the whole main point here. There is an oath, but what does he say? The anavim is only going against half the oath. And you don't bring a korban if you only went against half what you said in the oath. But what do you see? The oath is there. What was Rav Huna's answer, or the answer we gave for Rav Huna? That if you had the same, this is like hayom and machar. Hayom and machar by neder doesn't work. I'm sorry, by neder does work. By an oath, it doesn't work. And the second shvuah wouldn't be a shvuah at all. So if that was really the case, Rabbi should have said, you don't bring a shvuah on the second oath because there is no second oath. That's not what it says. Alma, from here you can infer, sounds like this is a new oath. Since, right, just like we said by neder, and the whole thing was that the Mishna distinguished between them and said they're not the same. But just like that day 31, there's room for the neder to kind of be placed somewhere. So the neder applies, and therefore you're chayav two naziruyot. Same thing by this oath, because you added grapes to the picture. There's somewhere for the oath to be placed. Therefore, you end up being obligated on that second oath as well. So now we can't read the Mishnah, according to Rabba anyway, the way we just explained to explain Rav Huna. To which we answer very simply, Rav Huna lo svira like Rabba. Rav Huna is an Emora. Rabba is an Emora, right? If Rabba was a Tana, maybe, right? We'd have to say, you don't agree with this Tana. How could that be? Maybe you can find another Tana that holds like his position. But we could bring a question against Rav Huna. But basically, the Gemara says, what do I care if Rabba says this? Rav Huna could disagree with Rabba and maybe doesn't hold this way. He might hold, you're not obligated to korban shvuah because the second oath doesn't apply. And therefore, don't ask me questions from Rabba. This is Rav Huna. Rav Huna could disagree with Rabba. Okay, that's the rules of the game. Okay, so again, we had two questions from our Mishnah. Okay, one was, sounds very clear, yesh neder b'toch neder, and it doesn't distinguish. That we left as a question. The second was, if we want to try to find a parallel where there is neder, there isn't shvuah, it must be in a case of machar, hayom and machar. I'm sorry, hayom and hayom. To which Rav Huna answered, no. We could find a parallel hayom and machal because of this case, right? Originally, they thought hayom and machar would be parallel to anavim and te'enim, and that would for sure apply by shvuah as well. Rav Huna said, no. It's more like Te'inim and Anavim, and that wouldn't work by Shvua, it would work by Ned. Okay? Third question, Meitive. This is a Tosefta in Nazir. Mishna, Nazar, Shtei Nazirot. I took a Neder to be a Nazir twice. Now we're going to assume it's either going to be Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, or Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Machal. Okay? So we're going to basically, by process of elimination, say it can't be this, therefore it must be that. And again, we're going to be back to our question. So let's read the case first, and then you'll see. So he took upon himself 2 Naziriyot. In the end, you're going to see that maybe there's a different way. You could take 2 Naziriyot, which aren't any of our options of Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Machal. Okay, that's going to be one of the answers, but that's in tomorrow's daf. You took upon 2 Naziriyot, right? We're going to end here with the question. Mana et Rishonam. So you counted 30 days for the first Nizirut. Hiflish korban. You designated your sacrifice, like we saw before in the previous, right? You get all ready to be done. And then you decide nish'al alehem. You decide, it sounds like crazy you can do this, but we know with a vow, you can undo your vow. You go to a chacham and you say, listen, I really didn't mean to take upon the Nizirut. You undo the Nizirut that you already did, okay? Al talo shniya barishona. Since you took upon yourself 2 periods of Nizirut, so now you sat for 30 days as a Nazir, did all the right things. You undid your first Nizirut. What happens? Your second Nizirut retroactively, instead of having to do 30 days and 30 days, 60 days altogether, that second Nizirut kind of fills in those first 30 days and you're done, finished. Okay, now, what's the case? The key word here is you're finished at this point, right? Sounds like that way anyway. Like I said, it's all a matter of how you translate al talo shniya barishona, but it sounds like your 30-day Nizirut that you took upon the second time is now going to basically fill in all those days. So hechidami. If it was that you stood at day 1 and you said, I'm going to be a Nazir today, I'm going to be a Nazir tomorrow, well, you can't possibly be done with your Nazirut at this point. Why? Because amai al talo shniya barishona ha'ika yomi yeteha. You can't. Right. This is why it doesn't mean I took upon Nazirut all the way at the end of the period, because you can't take on Nazirut today and say, oh, it was for me from all the way back when. So what they're assuming is, right, when did your Nazirut start? On day number 2, your second Nazirut. Your second Nazirut can't start on day number 1. It can't go into those days if you only said I'm going to be a Nazir starting from day 2. So you can't say, I'm done, I'm completely finished, because you still have one more day to do. Basically what happens, you got rid of the first one. You started on Sunday, let's say. So Monday is day 1 of your second Nazirut. So when we go back and kind of fill in the days, we can only fill in 29 of those days and not the 30th. So you still need one more day. And they assume that what the Tosefta means is that you're done completely. And it doesn't make sense then. If it was Hareini Nazir Yom, Hareini Nazir Machar, you'd need one more day. Ela pshita, so it must be, Damar, Hareini Nazir Yom, Hareini Nazir Yom, Utiyuv to Rav Huna. It must be where you said, I'm a Nazir today, I'm a Nazir today. And therefore, when you later go and undo one of them, the other one will come completely in its place, start from day 1, retroactively, end at day 30, you're finished, and great, done with your Nizirut. So that is the only way they understand right now to understand the Tosefta, although we'll see other ways tomorrow. And this basically contradicts Rav Huna, because what does it say? If you say, Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, the second Nizirut is applicable, it is there. And remember, Rav Huna said no. Hareini Nazir Hayom, Hareini Nazir Hayom, ein neder b'toch neder. You don't have a second Nizirut, in which case you wouldn't need to say, oh, you fulfilled your first Nizirut, your second Nizirut within the days that you did for your first one, because you don't even have a vow upon you at all, because that vow is not a relevant vow. Okay, so this clearly goes against Rav Huna. Although I say clearly, the Gemara will answer this on Daf Yud Chet. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. As I told you, what's coming up right now, at least till we get to the next section, is we're going to bring one more, after we answer this question, we're going to bring another question on Rav Huna, and with that, we'll finish our section of 4 questions against Rav Huna's understanding. Okay, so like I said, Rav Huna is definitely not the simple reading, and it's probably why the Gemara had a lot of issues and raised a lot of questions with his position and didn't deal at all with Shmuel, which seems to be the more simple reading. The Yesh Neder B'toch Neder is, even if I said the exact same thing twice, it would still apply. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.